Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. On today's show, I'm joined by retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis to talk about his new book, Preparing for World War III. It's a fascinating and sobering book, and he's going to be telling us about how current events are setting the stage for another major world war. Before I introduce Colonel McGinnis, let me tell you that later in the program, I'm going to be talking in the subscriber-only segment about Stargate AI. This is a $500 billion artificial intelligence program here in the United States over the next 4 years that we're going to be investing major dollars in artificial intelligence. I'm going to talk about the significance of that, especially in light of our war with China. We're at war with China. It's a technological war that someday could result in deciding who wins the military war. This is a major issue. China just recently unveiled their own version of AI called DeepSeek at a fraction of the cost of our AI. And so I'll be talking about the significance of that and just the war with China. What's happening in the technological war with China and how far ahead of us are they, because they are ahead of us. I'll be giving you the facts about that in the subscriber-only segment. Also, I'll be answering some questions that have been written in. The first question is, someone writes in, my question is, does the Antichrist know who he is right now? If not, how does this one person step forward to control the world out of all men? Another question is, will we Christians in heaven know what family members were not saved after the rapture and after the second coming of Christ? I know there's no sadness in heaven, so will we just forget our loved ones? That's a very good question. Here's another question. What about a person who is quiet and shy and has been saved for many years and has not brought anyone to the Lord and questioned their salvation? And so I'll be getting to those questions, maybe more if we have time in the subscriber-only portion. It is my great honor on today's show to welcome retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis. He graduated from the U.S. Military Academy, the Naval Postgraduate School, the Command and General Staff College, the Defense Language School, and the Army War College's Strategy Course. He is an Airborne Ranger Infantry officer with service in 4 infantry divisions on 3 continents. Until late 2020, Colonel McGinnis served as the vice president for his contracting firm with duties at the Pentagon, supervising a team of national security experts, and as a security cooperation expert for the headquarters Department of the Army, as well as the instructing a course at the Army War College. Colonel McGinnis is joining me today to talk about his fascinating new book, Preparing for World War III. Colonel, it's an honor to have you joining me today.
Sure. My pleasure, Jimmy.
You know, I can't count how many times I've heard the phrase World War III in this past year. I think I've heard it more in the past year than I've heard it my entire life combined. And it's just, the world is just so dangerous, and a lot of people are just believing that war is imminent. I mean, is that why you wrote this book?
Yeah, certainly if you search the internet, and you're right, Jimmy, you see the term World War III mentioned across the entire domain of the cyber world. And so people are concerned. They're searching for answers. And obviously for those of us that are Christians and attuned to the prophecies, we're concerned that, it could be imminent. And so I launched into this. I see that we're, like the Titanic, heading toward an iceberg. And if we don't make a very sharp turn and very soon, we're going to collapse into that iceberg and sink. And I use that metaphorically, but it's a very serious concern.
Yeah, it is. What do you think? Because China is a big issue. I want to talk about China in just a minute. And you talk about China a lot in your book. But what difference do you think President Trump makes? I know that you served under many presidents. The commander-in-chief certainly makes a difference. But in the larger scheme of things, related to the geopolitics of the world, does the Trump factor make a big difference the next 4 years?
Well, I certainly hope that it will. And no doubt here in the first week plus of his return to the White House, we've seen, very encouraging moves, not only about our domestic security, but about our foreign policy. And so I'm optimistic that he's going to make a significant change in our current course. Now, at the same time, I recognize that our enemies have a vote here. The Chinese, which we'll talk about, are very serious about their ambitions globally. The Russians, of course, are in the middle of a war and are using their growing might to intimidate much of Europe as well as the United States. And then nobody can forget about what's happening in North Korea, what's happening in the Middle East with Iran. And there are terrorist activities around the world that, really pose a serious threat against our own domestic security. So there are a host of things that are going on here, and we have to take those into account as we assess whether or not we're moving toward a larger conflict across the world.
Well, you see the technologies today, and you write about this a lot in your book. The technologies today are just really terrifying. When you look at, China is trying to, you write in your book here, is that they have a 250-year plan of basically taking over the universe. But, they are very aggressive. But drone technology, AI technology, transhumanism technology, what are the technologies that you're seeing that concern you the most?
A lot of what you just said and much more. Certainly artificial intelligence. Here recently, we've seen, of course, the Chinese are monopolizing a portion of that and will use it not only for their economic prowess, but of course will apply it to its national security and its project that capability across the world to its own favor. They're using it in space. They'll, of course, I look at how space has become really a future battleground.
Absolutely.
I have no doubt that they are using, the Chinese, the Russians, and perhaps others, and to include ourselves, are beginning to weaponize space. It's not only a place for guidance that runs our economy and guides our ships and our warplanes into the right targets, but it's being used, I think, to expand not only to our moon, but to planets and beyond. And the Chinese have made it very clear they have every intention of establishing a colony on the moon in the foreseeable future, and they're using their own technologies to some of which I've written about in certainly preparing for World War III, to take down other guidance systems that we're critically dependent upon. And so space is significant. We have directed energy weapons. We have cyber warfare, which is just beyond the pale and really significantly impairing our ability and challenging our abilities. And meanwhile, the Chinese are developing an armed forces, which is, exceeding ours in many areas. Certainly their Navy is larger than ours. Their sophistication is almost on par with ours. Certainly their nuclear forces are gaining great capabilities and faster than we're, bringing our older systems into a line. Our ground forces, our marine forces, our other forces are just not keeping pace, and yet we're losing the intellectual property that allows them to take those advantages. So there are a host of things that are happening today that are indicative of things that we've seen in the past. After all, Jimmy, the Bible doesn't speak of World War I and World War II. It speaks of one future war. Right. And that future war may be the one we're talking about, or it may yet be 1,000 years away. I don't know.
So let's talk East versus West, because you have had a unipolar world with the United States being the sole superpower. Now you have a bipolar world, or emerging bipolar world, with China really rivaling us in many areas. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they want to shift the balance of power to the East. Right now, fight breaks out. Who's more powerful, the West or the East?
Well, we've run simulations, war games, and we have found that, for instance, in a Taiwan scenario, which could happen, I think, within the year 2027, is kind of what President Xi of China is looking at, to take that, what he calls a breakaway province, back under the fold of Beijing. If we were to do that in a limited scenario, the United States would lose a couple of aircraft carriers, a couple hundred aircraft, maybe 10,000 troops, and so forth. And yet, we would deliver some decisive blows against the Chinese. They would probably end up being a draw, but a very bloody one. Now, if it were to exacerbate beyond just Taiwan to much of Southeast Asia or the South China Sea area, to include perhaps Japan, the Philippines, the Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and so forth, and it would draw in allies like the Australians, then you can have what I'd consider a global war. Clearly, the Iranians would become involved and would use their various proxies, and other totalitarians might sit on the sideline, unknown about Turkey, unknown about the Saudis. They're not as favorably disposed as they used to be toward us. Right. And then, of course, the war in Europe. We would hope to end that as soon as possible. I know that's an aspiration of Mr. Trump's, but Vladimir Putin has his own agenda and has every intention of not walking away empty-handed. And so all of these things across the world, there's great turbulence. The technologies are advancing faster than we can keep up. And the bad people out there are just as bad as they've ever been in the world. So it's not a pretty scene.
Well, they're saying even the cartels on our southern border are very sophisticated today. They have modern technologies, maybe not all the technologies, but the bad guys have better weapons than they used to have.
Well, there's no doubt about that. Money buys that. And of course, you can buy the technology, and whether it's space-based technology, which cartels will certainly have because of Elon Musk, Starlinks and the like.
Right.
And you can watch what your enemy is doing anywhere in the world at any given time. You have sensors that can detect that. We haven't even answered the questions as to what are all the drones off the East Coast doing.
Right.
Who do they belong to? Are they ours, or do they belong to an adversary? After all, back in 23, we allowed a spy balloon to cross the entire United States unopposed. So, there are a lot of things that are going on that are seen and unseen that, paint a picture of very dangerous times today. And so, yes, the cartels and other terrorist groups will have access to drones and rockets and intelligence to use to their advantage. And of course, they will use cyber, and they'll use other means of communication to carry out their dastardly deeds. And this is a time of some concern, I would say. And yes, I'm hopeful that Mr. Trump will reverse a lot of the bad decisions that the Biden administration made. But some of those are going to be very hard, if at all, we're able to reverse them.
Yeah, and it takes a long time for some of those to be reversed. Now, in your second section of your book here, you say lessons from the historic record of 2 world wars, because basically you're saying that some of the key causes of World War I and World War II are present today.
Oh, indeed. The whole appeasement issue, Neville Chamberlain, of course, in 1938 was over in Munich, and he negotiated with Adolf Hitler, and Neville Chamberlain came home, the Prime Minister of England, and he said, peace in our time. Well, he'd just given away Czechoslovakia to Hitler, and of course that was after Austria was taken over by Hitler. And then in the summer September the 1st of 1939, the Wehrmacht under Hitler, charged into Poland, and World War II started. Meanwhile, of course, the Brits were fat, dumb, and happy at home, and the French were, trying to figure out their political shenanigans, which they'd gone through 16 coalition governments, since the First World War. So you had an absolute mess, and yet appeasement to Hitler and the National Socialists didn't work. We, of course, set them up with the Versailles Treaty, which was, of course, a lot of bad decisions on our part, and we didn't monitor it afterwards. Now, there were alliance efforts. The Nazis formed alliances with, obviously, the Italians and the Japanese. Meanwhile, of course, the Japanese in 1936 went into China and intimidated and captured that large country. And of course, the Italians wanted the entire Mediterranean basin to their own, and the Nazis were incredibly vociferous in North Africa and elsewhere in the world. So you have these authoritarian regimes that align themselves together. Economically, you had all sorts of things that are going on at that time. They were just the diplomats really were trying to do things that just didn't make any sense. And of course, there was a military buildup. Just as Hitler took office in 1933 as the chancellor of Germany, he secretly began to rebuild, and we ignored that. Well, the world today has seen a significant increase, unlike anything prior or post-World War II, of military forces around the world. It's not just with the Chinese, which, you can only explain it through hegemonic understanding of what their ambitions are. But the Russians have turned their entire economy into a wartime economy, and they're doing quite well. Unfortunate to their local citizens, because they have some real trials there. The same thing with North Koreans, the Iranians, who we've unleashed thanks to Mr. Biden. And then elsewhere in the world, as the world watches, it wants to arm up against what they see as a coming war, and they're beginning to align themselves with one side or another. So I go through a lot of what happened in World War I, World War II, and all the indicators today. Back in 2018, I wrote a book, Alliance of Evil, and I pointed out 16 indicators of the new Cold War. At the time, most people dismissed my warning, but today every one of those are evident in spades, and most people have come to the conclusion that yes, we are in a Cold War, and hopefully it won't become a hot war with both China and Russia and others that are aligned with them.
Our utility companies in America are being hacked on a regular basis by the Chinese. The Russians, the Chinese, North Koreans, the Iranians, they're all trying to compromise our infrastructure. I know the State Department is, the Pentagon is under constant siege in that regard. With technology the way that it is, Colonel, how does that redefine modern warfare? In other words, if we go to war, if it's a Cold War and it just stays a war of, cyber war, that type of thing, and, maybe some trade sanctions or whatever. But if we do go to war, how does technology change the rules of engagement, the battlefield?
Yeah, well, it impacts the homeland because, as you've indicated, Jimmy, the Chinese, the Iranians, Russians, and so forth have implanted malware within our vulnerable infrastructure so that they can turn on a switch, essentially, and turn off our water, turn off our electricity, our cell phones, and our medicine, and so forth. It's an incredibly vulnerable time. We've known about this capability for some time and have been negligent in addressing it. I know Congress has had many hearings. They know about the truth of these incursions into our domestic systems. So the future war here, when it happens, will be, I think, initially felt through the cyber domain. because the enemies, without their fingerprints, ostensibly, will begin to affect our way of life. And so we could be tossed back into the Stone Age because we have not hardened our systems. And of course, they could always use space-based forces to launch a EMP that would destroy the electronics that are not hardened above a large city like New York City or a region of the country. So these are all very real threats, things that we've felt to a certain degree in the past, but nothing to the scale that would be visited upon us if we were to become engaged in more of a global war with the likes of the Chinese, the Russians, or others.
Yeah, there's so many threats out there. And again, I'm comforted by the fact that President Trump is president, but there are so many issues that have accumulated under Biden in the last 4 years we've got so many bad actors on our soil right now. And Colonel, you believe that we are unprepared, and you've said a little bit of that already. Why do you think that the United States is basically unprepared for what's about to happen?
Well, our armed forces are weak, to say the least. We have a third of the forces to fight a global war that we need in our Army. Our equipment is aging. We haven't been modernizing very long. Our Navy is no longer the premier Navy of the world. The Chinese are. We have a declining number of warships, of platforms. Even though we may have 11, 12 aircraft carriers, they aren't all what they need to be. And the Chinese are ramping up toward a fleet of about 450 warships, and we're declining from about 280. Now, are we going to be able to meet our operational demands of the next few years? Probably not, because we aren't investing nearly enough. Our Air Force is weak. We don't give our pilots sufficient flying hours. There's not a single fighter squadron in the U.S. Air Force that can meet all the readiness levels that are necessary. Modernization is behind the eight ball. Our nuclear forces, of course, are marginal because we have been investing in modernizing like the Chinese and the Russians have over the last few years. Warheads become unpredictable if they aren't refitted appropriately, much less ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and then, of course, regional length ballistic missiles. Our space forces also are marginal because we have insufficient space forces for current operations. And why are they critical? They provide us the GPS for our weapon systems. They provide us the links for our banks. They provide us links all over the world. And so we haven't been investing enough in that. You know, it really points a pretty dire situation. But when you consider also that our defense industrial base isn't what it was years ago. I know President Eisenhower warned about the defense industry, the contractors and so forth out there, and that they were taking advantage and using the taxpayer money inappropriately. But what we found today, especially in the wake of the 2022 war that Putin started in Ukraine, we've been trying to supply the Ukrainians with arms, and though we've increased production 10%, we've emptied our arsenals. And unlike World War II, under Roosevelt leading in 1938, he turned the industrial might of the United States into making tanks and airplanes and the like. We don't have that legislation. We don't have that means anymore. And our industrial base just can't keep up. Meanwhile, of course, the Russians and the Chinese are doing just the opposite.
Right.
And they're building very capable forces.
You know, to your point, you were talking about our Navy. I read an article a couple of weeks ago. We decommissioned 17 of our naval ships because we didn't have the manpower, didn't have the troops. And I believe this is a correct statement. All of the armed forces, I think, maybe with the exception of the Marines, have fallen short of their recruiting goals for a number of years. And so we just don't have the might that Russia, China, and other people have of just the armed forces. Is that correct?
That's correct. The Marines are only 176,000 strong, and they have managed to focus through a lot and through a good history to maintain their level of recruiting. Whereas the Army has fallen short and the others have fallen short. And it's not just numbers, it's also quality.
That's right.
We have very sophisticated weapon systems these days, and you need smart people to join. And unfortunately, because of the competitive jobs marketplace, a lot of the talent of America doesn't go to the armed forces. And as a result, we're operating in systems that are very difficult to operate with people that aren't quite as talented as what we need. And there's only so much that pay can do, because we're asking people to go to some pretty tough places under the seas in a submarine or on an aircraft carrier, and or in some foxhole in far distant land. Not everybody wants to do that, and yet we need a lot more people than we're actually able to recruit.
Well, so do you believe in, I know it's impossible to predict, do you think that we're going to get hit? America is not in Bible prophecy. There's nowhere that it says explicitly America is in Bible prophecy. We are the preeminent superpower in the world today. So if we're not in Bible prophecy, something's going to happen between now and then. So do you think we're going to get hit by an outside force?
Well, either that or we, domestically collapse internally. We come to the point in which we no longer are willing to pay the price to, defend ourselves or to be economically and ideologically competitive in a very, tough world. And so, I agree with you totally. America's not in biblical prophecy. So at some point, we're going to be removed or marginalized to the point that we aren't even, a has-been. So these are all issues of some significance. So I don't dismiss that real possibility. I think that even though we're optimistic in the light of Mr. Trump's election, in the broader sense, he's only going to be there 4 years. And a lot of damage has been done here recently by the Biden administration. And so where are we going to be 4 years from now? Are we going to be safer? Are these systems going to be reversed in a way that the world pays attention, that America is still the shining light on the hill? Or are we going to be so marginalized because our enemies continue apace to diminish our capabilities and to threaten our longevity? That's a real concern.
Yeah. The thing I like about your book, of course, you have, a very great perspective on this based on your service and just your training, all the training that you had militarily. But preparing for World War III, it's a book that talks about what's happening in the world. What I like about your book is this is where people are thinking. A lot of people are very anxious. You give a lot of great perspective here, but you also, you're a Christian, you're a believer, and this is a very Christ-centered book. And so how can the average Christian out there watching this, a lot of people are anxious, a lot of people are wondering, hey, what's going to happen next? How does a Christian prepare for a future war or future events?
Yeah, well, certainly prayerfully. The Scripture, I think, gives us a lot of hope ultimately, but that doesn't mean between now and the rapture, or between now and the time I'm with Christ in heaven, that there won't be a lot of suffering. In fact, some of the illustrations, the real illustrations in there, demonstrate how Christians in the past lived through some very, very tough times. Yeah. And I would not have wanted to live through any of those circumstances, but they did. And they did because of their faith in Christ. And so I think that that's the best way to equip ourselves for the potential of a World War III or crises in the future, is to be close with the Lord. Recognizing that if he does keep us alive, during a time of tribulation, that we have a very specific mission to not only be Christ to the world, but to help our brothers and sisters in ways that, today is hard to imagine, but it's what it is.
Yeah.
So, that's why I have a chapter one dedicated on doing the secular things that everybody ought to do to prepare. But at the same time, there's a chapter dealing with what the Christian ought to consider as he or she faces war. And it's a pretty sobering few pages.
Yeah, you have some great stories in there about, just the real suffering that people have been through, in the past. And knowing Jesus and our faith, and in China right now, there are millions of believers over there. They're living in persecution every day. Same in Iran. And so, one more question, and that is, you look at the possibilities. You talked about there is one major war prophesied. That's Armageddon, and we're seeing some very ominous signs. It's impossible to say the day and the hour and when are things going to happen. But in the Middle East right now, you have a very unstable situation without any natural solution. There's going to be an Antichrist someday that comes with an answer that's going to be a false answer. But do you see the Middle East situation right now, just geopolitically, do you see that as being anywhere close to what could end up in Armageddon?
Yeah, the differences continue. In spite of the fact that during the Trump administration, the first version, we had the Abrahamic Accords, which were very promising, bringing certain countries together for the first time ever. And of course, I know that's the ambition of the second Trump administration. But given the personalities, given the histories, I see Turkey. A lot of people don't think of that as a Middle Eastern country necessarily because it's aligned with NATO, but it's led by Erdogan, who of course is a Muslim and would like to be, based upon his own statements, the caliphate and development of the broader Middle East under his leadership. He'd like that. I know President Sisi in Egypt is rather ambitious, and he has basically told a friend of mine that that's what a lot of the Muslim leadership of the Middle East thinks that is the end goal of Erdogan. Iran, of course, is now signed strategic agreements with both Russia and China for defense purposes, economic purposes. I don't discount the might of the Saudis because there's a lot of money there, and they use that. And of course, what a lot of people don't realize is they have an entire long-range ballistic missile silos in the middle of that country, and they have a cozy relationship with the Pakistanis. And so, if the Saudi leadership wanted, they could easily purchase nuclear weapons from the likes of the Pakistanis, and the Pacs, given their issues, would probably be willing to do that, given the history of things back and forth. The Iranians, of course, I think are on the cusp of developing capabilities, and we saw in 2024 the April and the October attacks on Israel. Though Iron Dome and Arrow and David Sling were very effective, we also participated, as did, interestingly, others in the Middle East to defend the nation of Israel. But there's so much turbulence, so much ingrained hatred over thousands of years that it's going to take a lot more than a couple of Abrahamic Accord treaties and good talks to calm down what ultimately will end our time in Armageddon.
That's right. Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, Preparing for World War III, a global conflict that redefines tomorrow. This is a fantastic book. And where can people get this book, and where can they find out more about you?
Well, I'm all over the internet, and don't believe everything you read. The books, this is my 12th book. I've written chapters and other books for others. This is obviously available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, certainly Walmart, other places. It's overseas as well as in this country. So it's readily available. It's soon to be available in audio. It's already available, as a download, but also in paper. So it's reasonably available to everyone. And I would encourage people to prayerfully consider the material in here. It was just finished in November, end of November, and it just came out in December. And so these are fresh ideas. It was completed after President Trump was elected again, and it has things that I think every Christian that is concerned about the direction of the world needs to consider.
Absolutely. And so preparing for World War III, I encourage everybody to get this book. Colonel, thank you so much for being with me today. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you, Jimmy. My pleasure.
You bet. Right now, we're going to go to the subscriber-only portion of the program. And so if you're not a subscriber, go to endtimes.com right now, $7 a month. You can be a subscriber, $77 a year. We also have a 7-day free trial. If you want to check us out, the subscriber-only portion, you get to see the whole Tipping Point show without commercials, plus all the other podcasts and articles, everything we have on endtimes.com all week long. And so go become a subscriber, $7 a month, $77 a year, or you can do the free trial. We'd love to have you be a subscriber. The price of the Big Mac, to get all this information, all this equipping to prepare you for the world that we're living in today. And one of the greatest benefits of being a subscriber to endtimes.com is comfort, is having a perspective of what's taking place in the world that gives you comfort. This is the way that we support the ministry. The subscriptions is one of the ways that we support the ministry. We also ask people who are already subscribers to go on endtimes.com, give a donation. Even if you're not a subscriber, if this ministry has blessed your life, go on endtimes.com and give a donation there, and we would appreciate that very much. But if you want to become a part of the subscriber-only portion, go to endtimes.com, become a subscriber. If you are a subscriber, stay tuned.